Coming up today, it's one of the highest level meetings on the matter yet. The foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan are set for talks in Seoul on Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. A major defeat for the Islamic State group as Iraqi troops capture a key ISIS-held complex in the western city of Ramadi. Plus, after a relatively mild few weeks, winter finally gets its grips into Korea with the morning low in Seoul starting at -9 degrees Celsius. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Monday, December 28th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, the foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan will hold high-level talks in Seoul this Monday afternoon on the long unresolved issue of Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women and girls before and during World War II. For a closer look at the possibility of a breakthrough before the year is out, our foreign affairs correspondent Kwon So-ah reports.
Could 2015 be the year that not only marks 50 years of diplomatic ties between Korea and Japan, but the year the two countries resolve one of their thorniest issues? That question is expected to be answered Monday when Seoul and Tokyo's foreign ministers are scheduled to talk about how to settle the issue of Japan's sexual enslavement of Korean women during the Second World War. Prior to that, representatives from both countries met for a 12th round of working-level talks on the issue in Seoul Sunday. Korea's representative to the talks, the Foreign Ministry's Northeast Asian Bureau Chief Lee Sang-duk and his Japanese counterpart Kimihiro Ishikane were said to have met for 2 hours to set the agenda for Monday's higher-level talks, but no details were released after the meeting. However, there has been speculation about a breakthrough ever since Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's order to Tokyo's foreign minister last week to resolve the issue once and for all.
The negotiations on the topic are accelerating more than ever before, especially after the Korea-Japan summit last month. I think the timing of Foreign Minister Kishida's visit and the ministerial talks is of great importance.
Although these latest developments seem to bode well for Monday's meeting, the Korean government is skeptical about Japan's sincerity, especially after Japanese media reported over the weekend that Korea is considering moving a symbolic comfort woman statue away from the place across from the Japanese embassy in Seoul. According to Seoul, that's not an option at all. Another potential obstacle is there's been no change in Korea and Japan's basic stances. Seoul wants a formal apology and compensation from the Japanese government for the women, and Tokyo says it wants to approach the issue from a humanitarian perspective. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, staying on the topic, and it is a race against time, given that most of the survivors of Japan's wartime sex slavery system are now in their 80s or 90s. And that's why a group of 10 of them is urging Japan to waste no time opening a compensation case. They are seeking 100 million Korean won, that's roughly $85,000 each, from the Japanese government. Kim Kang-won, who represents the women, filed a document with the Korean court on the issue last week. The request follows several previous attempts, as Japan has thus far refused to accept the case. There were originally 12 women listed as complainants, but 2 have died since the first document was filed in 2013. Korea's main rival parties have once again failed to reach an agreement on redrawing the electoral map ahead of general elections in April. Ruling Saenuri Party chairman Kim Moo-sung and floor leader Won Yu-chol met with their main opposition New Politics for Alliance counterparts Moon Jae-in and Lee Jong-gol at the National Assembly on Sunday, but ended up right where they started. The two have been at odds over whether or not to decrease the number of proportional representatives, and neither party shows any signs of backing down. National Assembly Speaker Jung Hui-hwa made it clear before the meeting that this would be his last time presiding over discussions on the subject. Observers speculate that could mean Zhang can and will use his authority as Speaker to break the deadlock himself. Now, despite their failure in reaching an agreement on redrawing electoral districts, Korea's rival parties will attempt to pass other key pending bills at the National Assembly on this Monday. The rival parties have agreed to handle at a plenary session less contentious bills, which have already been approved by the Assembly's Legislation and Judiciary Committee. There are currently 9 bills that are pending in Parliament, including the Service Industry Development Bill, the North Korea Human Rights Bill, the Anti-Terrorism Bill and the Labour Reform Bills. Now, among them, the Service Industry Bill and North Korea Human Rights Bill have made some progress in negotiation, while the other bills pretty much remain at a standstill. Now, I've had a pretty good run with the relatively mild temperatures so far this season, but winter has most certainly arrived now. People in Korea are waking up to an extremely cold Monday morning. The morning low in Seoul started out at just -9 degrees Celsius, while readings plunged to a bone-chilling -13 degrees Celsius in mountainous parts of Gangwon-do province. It goes without saying that those of you in Korea should bundle up before heading outdoors today. The mercury will remain below zero in most parts of the country throughout Monday. The nation's weather agency has issued cold wave advisories for parts of Gangwon-do and Gyeonggi-do provinces for this Monday. Light snow flurries are forecast in some western coastal regions in the afternoon. This cold snap is forecast to continue until tomorrow before temperatures return to seasonal norms on Tuesday afternoon. Now, as well as the cold weather, the holidays can be hard on Korean soldiers fulfilling their duties as citizens of a nation torn in two. So, how do they keep up their morale and overcome their homesickness during these times? Our Kim Hyun-bin visited a general outpost on the inter-Korean border to find out.
All able-bodied men in Korea are required to serve mandatory military service for 21 months, and during that time, most of the holidays are spent in barracks. To provide the troops with a more homely atmosphere, numerous additions have been made to general outposts, or GOPs, dotted along the inter-Korean border. From a PC zone to weight room, the military has provided recreational facilities to boost morale and ensure the young men don't get too homesick. But the sad truth is that Korea remains the only divided country in the world. A military demarcation line stretching 250 kilometers splits the Korean peninsula in two.
Soldiers at the GOP remain on high alert while the rest of us enjoy the festivities. They'll continue monitoring for any unusual activities north of the border so we can rest easy and enjoy the holiday atmosphere.
Our ancestors made an endless effort to defend the Republic of Korea. We will do the same.
Troops on the border are trained to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. Day and night, they scour the border for signs of unusual activities or breaches.
We have the mentality to destroy any enemy forces while maintaining our highest defense readiness.
At night, the border is pitch black, so night surveillance equipment has been installed across the border to help troops spot what the naked eye can't. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News, Yeoncheon.
Now, the Iraqi military says it now has control over a former government compound that's been at the center of the battle for the western city of Ramadi. Islamic State fighters appear to have withdrawn from the compound. A military spokesman told Reuters that the development means ISIS has been defeated in Ramadi. The mainly Sunni Arab city, some 90 kilometers west of Baghdad, fell to ISIS in May. And in what was seen as a highly embarrassing defeat for the army. Now, Iraqi's Prime Minister now says government forces will soon move to retake Mosul, a much larger city in the north of the country. Now, about a year ago, the Associated Press Times Square Alliance poll showed that Americans closed out 2014 on an optimistic note, with nearly half predicting the year to come would be even better than the last. That was then. This is now. And this year's result of that same poll reveals 57% replying this year was worse than the last for the world as a whole. Only 10% said this year was better, while 32% think there wasn't really that much difference. 68% said the key reason for their negative response was the string of mass shootings, including the attacks in Southern California and those awful terror attacks as well in Paris. Others mentioned the Islamic State group atrocities and the Iran nuclear deal. And interestingly, more than 95% said they would rather watch New Year's Eve events on TV at home due to security concerns. Now, it turns out South Korea was the world's largest buyer of military weapons last year. This is according to a New York Times report citing the United States Congressional Research Service. South Korea reportedly spent $7.8 billion on weaponry in 2014. 90% of which was purchased from the US, including unmanned spy planes and transport helicopters. Iraq was the second largest importer, spending $7.3 billion on weapons in its ongoing efforts to build up its military after the withdrawal of American forces and its continued fight against the Islamic State group. Brazil came in third, spending $6.5 billion. US was the largest exporter of weapons, selling over half of all weapons bought by other countries, bringing revenue of $36 billion. The Bank of Korea has released its report card on consumer spending for the third quarter of this year. Consumption has been flagging, but spending on medical services rose significantly. Now, a recovery from the MERS outbreak earlier this year has been cited as the main reason. Our Kwon Jang-oh has this report.
Koreans spent $8.7 billion on medical services in the third quarter this year. That's a 7.5% increase over the same period last year, and almost 3 times more than the average increase in consumer spending. The amount is also double what was spent in the same period 8 years ago. The Bank of Korea released their statistics in a report on Sunday and said the jump is mainly due to people venturing back to hospitals after the outbreak of Middle East respiratory syndrome in May. Total spending on medical care up to the third quarter this year was up 6.6% due to more money being spent on elder care and medical tourism. Although people over 65 make up only 12% of the population, elder care now takes up over 36% of total healthcare spending. Medical tourism consumption rose by almost 5% this year. About 280,000 foreigners made the trip to Korea, with the majority of customers coming from China. Meanwhile, consumer spending as a whole was a mixed bag, with an average growth of just 2.6%. Food and drink expenditures went up just over 5%, while transport went up by 3%. But spending on clothing, education and entertainment was down by around 1 to 2%. The only other significant increase was to spending on alcohol and tobacco. A new tax on tobacco was introduced in January that almost doubled the price of cigarettes, leading spending to increase by almost 30%. Kwon Jang-oh, Arirang News.
Now, as a follow-up to that report, the Korean government's cigarette tax, which is part of various anti-smoking measures, is proving to be ineffective, as we just heard, in reducing the number of smokers. According to a local report citing a Dongbu Securities analyst, cigarette sales are rebounding after the tax, which raised cigarette prices from $2 per pack to around $4, was imposed in January, roughly 12 months ago. Now, earnings results from Korean tobacco company KT&G shows sales dipped temporarily after the tax was introduced, but then recovered, with the company's net profit jumping 55% in the January to June period compared to last year. The Finance Ministry had said back in August the government was expecting the tax revenue from cigarette sales to rise to around $9.4 billion from January to December, up by around 64% from the same period last year. Now, foreign coffee giants used to be the huge draw here in Korea, but now Korean chains are beginning to dominate the market. At the same time, the market is pretty much reaching saturation point. And as our Park Se-young tells us, the Korean chains are starting to look overseas for their next frontier.
Coffee chains are a dime a dozen on the streets of Korea these days, with nearly 50,000 cafes nationwide. That wasn't the case nearly 20 years ago when the first foreign chain started setting up shop here. The first successful one was Starbucks, which opened in 1999 and had expanded to over 800 by 2012. Idia Coffee followed in 2001, becoming one of Korea's first homegrown coffee chain. It went on to open over 1,700 shops across the country, while Angelina's opened nearly 1,000 branches around the same time. The foreign chains used to be the biggest draws, but that's just one of the trends that may be changing in Korea's crowded coffee market.
I used to go to foreign cafe chains, but lately the coffee from Korean chains has become tastier and more affordable.
Still, there's only room for so many cafes. And their expansion was curbed when in 2012, the Fair Trade Commission banned coffee companies from opening a new branch within 500 meters of another. As a solution, Korean coffee chains have turned to the foreign market. Korea's coffee giant Cafe Bene has ventured into China and the US, while the newer franchise Coffee Bay recently signed a contract with Walmart for US launch. Meanwhile, with the chain's rapid expansion, the instant coffee market has suffered dramatic losses, and they too are seeking to export their products overseas. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Monday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. We do hope your week gets off to a great start, and thank you as always for tuning in to our news bulletins. Goodbye.